Hey everybody, thank you so much for checking out my channel and for watching this video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how you can connect to Azure OpenAI service. First, I'm going to show you how you can connect using Public Endpoint. Then I'm going to show you how you can secure that using a Private Endpoint and how you can connect that from a VNet. And also I'm going to show you how you can connect even if you have a different tenant, as long as you have a Vnet Peering in between. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Let's get to it. So first things first, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Azure OpenAI and what it is and how it works. Well, Azure OpenAI is the implementation of OpenAI, but inside of Azure, which means that you have the same tools, you have the same capabilities. However, you have them in an environment where you can apply security, governance, and you can pretty much have it in your environment so you can have users. It's just the whole Azure environment that is around the OpenAI implementation. So what that means is that when you have OpenAI in Azure, you can create users, you can select security, you can pretty much put private link so that you can access it from inside of your environment. So it's just a way that you can bring all those tools in an environment that is controlled by you through governance, security, and things like that. The tools or the models that are available are the same ones, well, relatively the same ones that are available in OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, the 3, the 4, as well as Codex, embeddings are available, and DALL-E 2 is also available. However, you have to apply for it. OpenAI is also generally available right now. However, you still have to go through a process that you have to ask for that service to be available in your environment. Once the service is available in your environment, then you can do what we are going to do now, which is we're going to go ahead and access it. I'm going to show you how you can access it and how you can test the models very quickly. So let me go ahead and get to the portal and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so before we get into the portal, what I want to do is I'm going to talk about the architecture and what we have and how we're going to do this. So, I don't have a fancy whiteboard, but I do have this surface that I'm going to use. So I'm going to say that this is the Azure OpenAI. So this right here is the Azure OpenAI. Is not the OpenAI that is out on the internet. So when we look at this, what we're looking at is we are looking at the portal, and you see Azure OpenAI here. When you click on it, you see your instance here, and you can click on it, and at that point you can see your endpoint. This endpoint is the public endpoint. So when I see the public endpoint and I ping the endpoint itself, it comes back with a public IP address. So this is how you connect into your OpenAI. So again, when we go back in here, you have a public endpoint. This is how you connect into that OpenAI instance. So if you have a VNet, and we're going to go ahead and put a VNet here, and let's say the VNet IP address, this is an internal IP address, and let's say you have a 10.10.10.0.24. If you have a VM here that needs to access this OpenAI, even though they are both inside of Azure, you still have to, I'm going to go ahead and put the internet here just so that to illustrate, even though it's not inside of Azure, but you get the idea. The VM will have to traverse the internet to get to this public endpoint, which was a 20.x IP address for me, for my endpoint. So this is how you access the OpenAI instance in Azure. Now you might think, well, yeah, this is good, but what if I want to secure this in a way that is not available out on the internet? Well, in that case, what you can do, and I'm going to show you later in this video once we get to the portal, the demo, you can create what is called a private link or private endpoint, private link or private endpoint, private link. And what it does is it creates an internal connection from the OpenAI instance or OpenAI service. And what it does is it gives you an IP address inside of your VNet. So in this case, it would be a 10.10.7, for example. It's just an IP address that it gives you. When you create this private link, what it does is it updates your internal DNS, because every VNet has a DNS server and the VMs point to that DNS server. So what that DNS does is it takes this name that you have. In my case, my endpoint has a name, like I showed you when I pinged it. When you create this private endpoint, it updates DNS, and it updates it with this name, this OpenAI name, but it points to the internal IP address. So any VM, you don't need to make any changes. You still continue to use the same name. However, the translation, or the, when the IP address gets, when the DNS gets queried, it returns the private internal IP address, not the public endpoint. So this is what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and get started. What we have here is we have one VM that I'm going to show you, and that VM is going to access OpenAI. The first thing it's going to do is I'm going to show you it's going to access the public endpoint, and then we're going to set up the private link or the private endpoint, and then I'm going to show you how it accesses it from the inside. All right, let's go to the portal. Let's start the virtual machine that we have here. And I'm going to start this B1S machine. So as you can see, it's stopped. So let me go ahead and start it. Okay, the computer is running. So let's go ahead and take a look at the IP address. Copy that, put it into PuTTY. Assuming the security groups are open for SSH. Let's connect into this box. Okay, once you are logged in, let's go ahead and look at the files that we have here. We have a file that I'm going to use. We are going to use this file called ChatGPT v2.py, which is a Python script that we are going to use. What is this Python script doing? It's going to import OpenAI, import logging, import sys, and import OS. Set up the credentials. And this right here is your public endpoint or your endpoint. And then you have your OpenAI key. The OpenAI key is the one that you get from OpenAI. So let's go back to the portal. Let's go to OpenAI, click here. And here under keys and endpoint is where you find it. Here is the key. You copy this key, and then you bring it into here, and you type your key here. So then at that point, we just have to specify the deployment name. The deployment name is the DaVinci Customer Experience Text DaVinci 03. You can find that under Model and Deployments. You have to it was moved to the OpenAI Studio, but this is where you can have your deployments. You must have a deployment, otherwise it's not gonna work. So in my case, I have a GPT-3.5 Turbo, and this is my deployment, and this is the one that I'm going to use in my test here. So again, you must have a deployment, you give it a name, and then here after that, what we're doing is we are just generating a text. What I'm actually doing here is, so what I'm doing is I'm taking a file. So this is def main. I'm taking a file, and the file name is transcription.txt, and I'm setting up the context, and I'm saying the context is read from the file. So I'm saying the information that you're going to give me is it has to be in this file. And then while true, this is just while, you know, it just continues to ask questions. Question input, enter your question, and if the question is in lowercase, then exit, so generate a text. So this is just what it's doing. So the main thing here that we want to test is make sure that it's connecting to the endpoint. So let's go ahead and exit out of this, go here, and let's go ahead and execute this file. So actually Python, I'm going to use Python to execute it. Python 3, chatgpt v2.py. So now when we execute it, it says enter your question, okay, which is what we saw in the code. What is wrong? Question mark. And now what it does is it takes the transcription of the file, and it's just a transcription of another video that I used when I explained how ChatGPT saved my dad's life. So what it did is I said, what is wrong? And it just gave me this, an 80-year-old male that had a prostate biopsy yesterday, and it gave me information. Okay, so the next, what I do want to do though, is I want to ping my endpoint so you can see. Okay, so that's what it's translating to. It's translating to a 20.232 IP address. That is a public IP address. All right, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come here under private endpoint connections. I already have a private endpoint created. The way that you create one is you say private endpoint. It's going to ask you for a resource group. You give it a resource group, you give it a name, and then network interface is going to, you can be a little bit more specific, OpenAI connection, for example. And then you have a NIC. Remember, the connection that is going to be created is going to become a network interface, like how we saw here. It becomes a network interface in this VNet. This is the reason why it's asking for a nickname. And then the region, again, the region is where your VNet is. For me, I want to create the connection in West US 2 or West US 3. I'm going to do West US 3. OpenAI is in the East region. So by creating one in the West, I'm creating that connection back to here. So OpenAI is in US East or East US, however you want to call it. And this is going to be West US 3, for example. So that private link is going to be able, I'm going to be able to connect using this. Under resource, account, virtual network, this is where you select the virtual network that you're going to use. And the subnet, I'm going to select the test PL-VNet and the default, which is the only one I have, and dynamically allocate IP address. The DNS automatically is going to create a private DNS zone for this, so that way it can translate or, you know, just give you the right information. It's going to resolve to the right name or to the right IP address, and then you can do a review and create. So what happens when you do a review and create is that it creates this private endpoint. I already have one, so I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this because it takes time to create it. So I have this private endpoint here. If I click on this private endpoint information, what it does is it tells me where it is. It says that it is in the test NDI FMD VNet, and the default subnet, and the network interface is called OpenAI PE-NIC, and it's a private endpoint. If I click on this NIC, it should have a 10 right here, 10.1.0.10 IP address. Okay, So everything looks good. I do have my private endpoint set up. The only thing I need, and I'm going to go back to this, and you can see it's still, that's the IP address that it was resolving before. The only thing I need to do is go to OpenAI again, click on this link, go to networking, go to private endpoint, and make sure that is there, and then go back to firewalls and virtual networks and set it to disable. I can click on selected networks in private endpoints if I want to select other VNets. If I only want the private endpoint, that's all I want, is I can just set it to disable. Once I set it to disabled, it says no networks can access this resource. Private endpoint connections will be exclusive way to access this resource. So in other words, only private endpoints can access this resource when you set it to disabled. So I'm going to set it to disabled, and I'm going to save it. Okay, now this is saved. So now what I want to do is I want to look at my virtual machines. This virtual machine here, I want to see where it is. So let's click on it, and it is in the virtual network called B1S machine VNet in the default subnet. This is not in the VNet where the private endpoint is. So in other words, what I have is I have another VNet here, and this VM that I'm using is here. And this VNet is called B1S machine VNet. So if the theory is correct, the private endpoint is not in this VNet right now. Okay, so in theory, I should not be able to ping this. I should not be able to connect to OpenAI because my machine is in a VNet that does not have a private endpoint. So let's go back to here, and let's go ahead and try to execute this command again. Python ChatGPT, what is wrong, question mark. Now I get permission error, public access is disabled. So right now what this is saying is that I'm not able to get to this resource because only devices in the right VNet can access this resources. Okay, I think this test NDI this one is in the right VNet, and it is a Linux. So let's go ahead and start this one. Okay, so the test NDI FMD VNet VM has started. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this IP address, and we are going to set up a session. Okay, we have two virtual machines and two different VNets. This is in the VNet where we have our private endpoint. Let's see what we have. Yes, we do have a file called OpenAI test. So let's do a ping. Okay, so this one, when you ping it, you can see that it translates to an internal IP address of 10.1.0.10, which happens to be the internal IP address of what we saw earlier. So moving forward, that is the IP address. The configuration of the file is exactly the same. So I'm going to do Python 3, and the file name is OpenAI test.py. And it says enter your question. I'm going to say, what is wrong? Question mark. And goes out there and it answers the question. It says there is nothing wrong. And the reason is because the file that I put in here is shorter than the original file. But what I'm trying to show you is that it responds with the answer. So that means that at this point we are able to get to OpenAI using the connection. Now if I want to make this one work, I mean if I run it, what is wrong. This one still should not be working. Okay, so now what I can do is I can create a Vnet peering on these two VNets. I gotta go to the virtual network. So I need to create a Vnet peering between the B1S machine and the test NDI FMD. So let's do that. Again, different regions. This is in West US 3. This is in Central US. So let's go to this one. Let's go to peerings. This one has a peering to test PL VNet already, but I'm going to create one to B1S machine VNet. Peering link name to, I don't know, test NDI VNet. So allow, we're going to use that, and we're going to say subscription is this subscription and the virtual network is this V1S, and allow traffic and add. Okay, let's give it a minute. This is this connecting, and this one says updating, and this one says connected. All right, let's go to the B1S VNet. Let's look at the peerings, and there it is. It's already connected. Let's go back to this right here. Let's run this file again. What is wrong? And public disabled. Okay, the reason this is still not working is because of the DNS. If I ping, the reason is because it's still trying to go through the name, and the name still resolving to the public IP address. So what I need to do is I need to update the DNS. So the easiest way is update the host file on this host, and I'm going to 10.1.0.10, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to write in quit. So let's run this again. What is wrong? Question mark. And now it should work. Oh, I was supposed to type quit. Okay, exit, and now it's back out. Okay, so now going back to what we did, we created, so we started by looking at the VNet West US 3. The VM was connecting using the public endpoint. Then we closed that. We established a private link or private connection to the West US 3. This VM was able to connect to it without any problems because the DNS was updated automatically. Then what we needed to do is we needed to create a connection from this VM here, from the B1S machine VNet. That one didn't work because it was trying to go out through the public endpoint, which is closed. So what we ended up doing is we ended up creating a Vnet peering between these two VNets. And after doing that, the network connection was okay. However, DNS was not set up, because remember, every VNet has a DNS server. So this VM was pointing to that DNS, and that DNS server didn't know anything about the endpoint. So I ended up updating in this machine, I ended up updating the etc host file. Once I did that, then the connection started working. So as you can see, setting up all the little details is not very difficult as long as you have a picture of what you want to do. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and if you have any ideas and any content that I can create, something that you would like to see, please leave it in the comments down below. I always like to see those comments. Thank you so much for checking out the channel and for watching this video, and until next time, take care.